My son-in-law had been gone for his business trip for just 3 hours. My granddaughter returned from school with her eyes red and swollen from tears. She whispered faintly, "Grandma, please get me out of here. I'm afraid of my dad." Upon reaching my home, she gave me a recording. My knees buckled as I heard its contents. I discovered what my son-in-law had been doing. "I'm happy you're here. If you are viewing this video, please like it, subscribe, and let me know in the comments from where you are listening to my tale of vengeance. I am curious to see how far this story has traveled." I was making my way along the familiar cobblestone road, a heavy basket of groceries straining my arm. Though it was only 9:02 a.m., the sun was already intense, causing beads of sweat to form on my brow. I was on my way to my daughter Imani's home, located just 3 blocks away from mine. Pushing the wooden front door open, I heard a slight creak. Inside, the home was silent except for the gentle hum of the ceiling fan. Marquise, my son-in-law, was standing in the center of the living room, dressed in a sharp business suit with his hair styled perfectly. His usual black suitcase sat by the sofa, looking prepared for travel. He glanced at me, offering one of his strained, insincere smiles. "Danai, can you watch the house and get Zuri for the next few days? I'm heading out on a business trip. I'll definitely be gone for a few days," he rushed, his tone clearly showing he wanted the conversation to be over. I agreed, as I was accustomed to this arrangement. Marquise was often away for his job, and because Amani was overwhelmed with her own work, they frequently left my young granddaughter, Zuri, at home by herself. Zuri, who was just 10, is the daughter of Amani and her first husband, Jamal. I assumed she had already gone to school, following her daily routine. I posed a couple of questions about the food available for Zuri and also inquired about how Amani was coping with her job-related stress. However, Marquise gave only one-word answers, checking his watch. "My taxi is here. I have to go," he stated, his suitcase making a light scraping noise as he pulled it across the floor. I saw him to the door and observed the cab vanish down the street. Returning inside, I shut the door and attempted to dispel my feeling of unease. The house was neat, yet I began to clean the kitchen. The morning's breakfast dishes were stacked in the sink, and some of Zuri's shirts were in the laundry. I collected it all, then started the washing machine and opened the windows to let in fresh air. At about midday, I took a break on the couch with a cold glass of lemonade. I started thinking about Zuri. That sweet child was my biggest source of happiness. Her brilliant smile and shining eyes always lifted my spirits when I collected her from school. It felt like her stories brought back a piece of my own youth. Recently, however, I observed that Zuri had become more quiet, and her smiles were becoming rare. I rationalized it as her just getting older, or perhaps not yet being comfortable with Marquise. Regardless of the cause, she still adored her biological father, Jamal, despite his limited presence in her and Amani's lives now. Later that afternoon, I grabbed my canvas bag and headed to the elementary school. The school grounds were crowded with parents grouped together, and the chatter of children resembled a flock of sparrows. I waited in a corner, my gaze trained on the stream of students pouring from the gate. While other kids ran and leaped, proudly showing their grades to their parents and talking excitedly, I kept waiting, but Zuri was nowhere to be seen. A feeling of anxiety started to build in my stomach. I stretched onto my toes, attempting to peer over the masses. At last, I spotted her emerging after everyone else. Her heavy bag was slung over one shoulder, her head was down, and she moved with such slowness, as though she carried the world's burdens. "Zuri!" I called out, waving. She flinched, glanced up briefly, and then her eyes dropped again. As she approached, I became still. Her face was ashen, and her eyes were swollen and red, indicating she had been crying. Her typical innocent smile had vanished, replaced by a weary look, like she was concealing something. My heart dropped, and a piercing pain went through my chest. "Zuri, what is it, my dear? Did something occur at school, I inquired. My voice shaking as I took her hand. Zuri just shook her head silently. Her hand felt frigid in mine, despite the heat. I yearned to question her further, but the vacant expression in her eyes made me hold back. I gripped her hand firmly and guided her to the nearby bus stop. Throughout the entire journey home, she stayed close to me, clutching her backpack and not speaking. In response to my questions, she would only nod or shake her head, her gaze glued to the bus floor. The apprehension within me expanded like a heavy weight in my chest. The door to Amani's home shut behind us, and the sound of the lock clicking felt like the conclusion to a difficult day. I asked the child to remove her shoes, attempting to maintain a calm tone, though I was a bundle of nerves inside. Zuri remained motionless, gripping her backpack tightly and keeping her head down. I moved to the kitchen, made a warm cup of milk, and set it before her on the dining table. Though steam wafted from the cup, she made no move to drink it. She simply sat, her eyes fixed on the ground as if a great burden rested on her small shoulders. I drew a chair close and sat beside her. Placing a hand on her shoulder, I addressed her with the gentlest voice I could manage. "Zuri, my sweet, please tell Grandma what occurred at school. Did anyone upset you?" I attempted a smile, thinking my familiar expression might prompt her to speak, but Zuri only shook her head, her lips pressed shut. Her small hands gripped the backpack strap with such force that her knuckles whitened. I wished to press her, but her red, puffy eyes stopped me. I knew something was deeply wrong, but didn't want to compel her to speak before she was prepared. All at once, as if a dam within her had burst, Zuri cried out and broke into tears. Her sobs were piercing. Like a blade driving into my heart, she began to shake, her shoulders quivering, and through choked gasps, she uttered a few fragmented words. "Grandma, take me away. I'm so scared of my dad." Her voice was a faint whisper, yet each word pierced my soul, leaving me chilled and uncertain. "Dad? Do you mean Marquise? What frightens you? Tell me, my dear." I attempted to remain composed, but my voice was already shaking and my heart hammered as though it would break free from my chest. Zuri shook her head desperately, tears pouring down her face. "I don't want to stay here, Grandma, please." She embraced me tightly, hiding her face against my chest, her warm breath on my shirt. I held her close, patting her back, but felt overwhelmed. Marquise, the man I considered a source of support for Amani, Zuri's respectable stepfather. It was unbelievable, but the panicked look in Zuri's eyes was not something a child of 10 could fabricate. I comforted her. "It's all right, my dear. It's okay. Grandma will take you away from here. Don't be afraid. I'm with you." The reality, however, was that I was also terrified. I was afraid of what I was now confronting, and that it would be too much for me to manage. I saw no other choice. I resolved to bring Zuri to my home, which was 3 blocks away. I held her hand, shouldered her heavy bag, and we departed from Amani's residence. Zuri shuffled along beside me, her head still bowed. I was afraid to question her further. I simply held her hand tightly, hoping to offer some feeling of safety. Once we arrived at my place and the old wooden door was shut, I could finally take a small breath. My home is small but comfortable, filled with memories from when my husband Omari was alive. I guided Zuri into the living room and had her sit on the sofa. "Stay here, my love. Can I bring you some water?" I asked, affecting a cheerful voice. Yet Zuri continued to clutch her backpack, reluctant to release it. I sat next to her and carefully pried her hands from it. "It's all right, Zuri. It's only us here. Nobody will harm you." The child paused. She met my gaze and with shaking hands unzipped her bag. She took out a small, old black voice recorder from inside, the kind that resembles an inexpensive toy. She set it on the coffee table. Her hands trembled uncontrollably as she whispered, as if worried about being overheard, "Grandma, you need to hear this." My heart pounded. A terrible sensation came over me. With freezing fingers, I picked up the recorder and pushed the play button. A humming noise was followed by a click, like a door opening. Then came Marquise's voice, quiet and controlled, with an icy tone that chilled me. "Zuri, I'm home." On the recording, Zuri's voice sounded frail and defeated. "Dad, I'm not scared." I felt the blood freeze in my veins. Marquise went on, his voice heavy with pressure, like a threat. "If you tell your mom, she'll leave you. You don't want to make your mom unhappy, do you? This is our little secret." I could hear Zuri's sobs, a whimper so faint it tore at my soul. He continued speaking in a soft and artificial tone that made my skin crawl. Be a good girl. Don't resist. If you're bad, your mom will learn about everything and you'll lose her. The next sound was a chair creaking, then Zuri's muffled, panicked scream. No! Please! I don't want to! I was shaking from head to toe. The recorder fell from my grasp onto the table with a clatter, but the recording played on. Marquise's voice got deeper, every word a command. Be quiet. If anybody learns about this, they will all hate you. They'll call you a bad girl. The room seemed to go still, but I could not hear anything more. My head spun, and an immense agony and fury ripped through my chest as if I would be torn apart. Zuri erupted in tears, burying her face on the table as her shoulders shook with each sob. He touches me every time no one else is home, Grandma. He always tries to touch me in ticklish places, she said through choked breaths. I've told my mom many times, but she won't believe me. She even yelled at me for lying. I rushed to embrace her, my heart shattering into countless pieces. Oh, my sweet girl, I whispered as tears ran down my face. Shaking, I switched off the recorder. I couldn't bear another moment of that sound, of that voice. It was like a sequence of stabs, over and over. I'm so frightened, Grandma. I don't want to be in that house anymore. Zuri sobbed, her face pressed into my chest and her hands clutching my blouse. I held her, trying to console her, but I was trembling too. Fear, anger, and a feeling of powerlessness swirled inside me. Marquise, the man I believed was honorable, who I hoped would bring Amani joy, was a monster. And Zuri, my little granddaughter, had been suffering this all alone in the one place she should have felt safest. I handed Zuri a tissue for her face, attempting to remain calm. Don't you worry, my love. Grandma's here. I will not let anyone hurt you ever again, I said, even though I knew deep down that nothing would be easy from this point on. I went to the kitchen, got her a bowl of hot chicken noodle soup, and set it down before her. Have a little. You'll need your strength to talk with Grandma. But Zuri only shook her head and moved closer to me, as if only I could make her feel safe. I remained seated, holding her as she slowly drifted to sleep from exhaustion, her eyes puffy, her small hand still gripping the recorder like it was her last piece of proof. I stroked her hair as my tears fell, watching Zuri sleep with her innocent face now marked by pain. I knew that from this moment, life for both of us would never be peaceful again. The night arrived, and my small home was covered in silence, disturbed only by the steady ticking of the clock on the wall. Zuri slept beside me, her breathing irregular, her rest far from tranquil. I sat at the edge of the bed, softly stroking her fine hair. Each strand that passed through my fingers brought back memories of when she was an infant, curling into my arms and asking for a story. Now, however, her innocent face was marked by suffering, and her swollen eyes still showed fear. My heart was heavy, feeling as if it were being crushed. I reached for the phone. I dialed the number for Amani, my own daughter. I needed to ask when she was coming back. I needed to tell her what happened. I wanted to yell at her, to make her see the agony her child was experiencing. But the phone just kept ringing, unanswered. I sighed. Setting the phone down, a wave of helplessness came over me. Imani, so consumed by her career, her major projects, and the life she thought was happy with Marquise. But she was blind to the fact that Zuri, her own child, was being broken within that very home. At around 10 p.m., Zuri woke up abruptly. She glanced around, disoriented and with a panicked expression, as though she had just fled a bad dream. She hugged me close, her small hands shaking as they clutched my clothes. "Grandma, I'm scared." Her voice was weak and raspy, as if she had no energy left. "If my stepfather returns and learns I told you, he'll scream at me. What will he do to me now, Grandma?" Each word Zuri uttered was like a knife to my heart. I held her shoulders, trying to keep my voice steady, though I was seething with rage and pain inside. "Don't be afraid, Zuri. I am here with you. No one has the right to harm you again. I promise." I helped Zuri sit and gently dried her tears. The recorder was still in a corner of the room, a silent, cold witness. I didn't want to even look at it, but I knew it was the only proof that Zuri's suffering wasn't a lie. I located a small metal box that my late husband, Omari, used for his keepsakes. I placed the recorder inside and secured it with an old, rusty key. "See?" I said to Zuri with a forced smile. "Your proof is secure. No one can take it away." Zuri nodded. Her fear seemed to lessen slightly, but she still clung to me as if I was her only safe harbor. I brought her to the kitchen and warmed up the chicken soup from the afternoon. The aroma was pleasant, but Zuri just stared at it, not touching her spoon. "Please eat a little, Zuri," I urged in a soft yet firm tone. "You need strength so we can talk more." The girl hesitated. She picked up the spoon, but as she lifted it to her mouth, tears began to stream down her face again, falling into the bowl. "I'm sorry, Grandma," she whispered, her voice choked. "I didn't mean to worry you, but I had no one else to turn to." A lump formed in my throat, and I began to cry as well. I wiped her face and drew her near. "This is not your fault, my love. I am the one who should be sorry for not noticing sooner, for not protecting you." I dressed her in an old set of pajamas that belonged to Amani as a child, which I had kept in the closet. She lay beside me in the old wooden bed where Omari and I had slept for so many years. I sang her to sleep gently, humming a tune I used to sing to Amani. Zuri's breathing slowly evened out, but I knew this sleep could not ease the nightmares she carried within. I lay down and shut my eyes, but my mind raced. Old memories played back like a movie in slow motion. I thought of Omari, my kind husband, who passed away over 10 years ago from a sudden stroke. When he was alive, this house was always filled with laughter. At that time, Amani had recently married Jamal, a decent, hard-working man who always gazed at my daughter with loving eyes. I can still picture their wedding day. Amani looked stunning in a simple white gown, and Jamal was so nervous as he held her hand before the guests, his face as red as a schoolboy's. I was there, tears streaming down my face, not of sorrow, but of joy, seeing that my daughter had found a good man. Then Zuri was born, a ray of light that brightened our family. I remember holding her for the first time, so small and curled in my arms, looking at me with her big, round eyes. From the yard, Omari would call out, "Danai, I'm going to carve the little one a wooden doll to play with." He would carve with such dedication, making lovely little dolls, and he would smile with pure happiness watching Zuri clutch his gift. In the evenings, Jamal would return from work, and the first thing he'd do was lift his daughter, kissing her cheeks while Amani cooked dinner. I would sit and observe them, our entire family together, and my heart would feel so warm, like I was basking in the sun. Those were the happiest times, simple yet full. Everything began to unravel after my husband, Omari, died. A sudden stroke took him from us, leaving this little house feeling empty like a hollow shell. I can still recall the day the doctor summoned me into the emergency room and said in a gentle but cold voice, "We've done all we could, Mrs. Calloway." I just stood there, my legs feeling weak, as I looked at Omari lying still on the bed. His kind face was now just a pale shadow. I didn't cry in that moment, but when I returned home and sat in his usual chair, I broke down completely. The house that had once been so full of laughter was now filled only with the clocks ticking, as if it were marking the days of my loneliness. Amani was also devastated by her father's death. She tried to remain strong, but I could see the emptiness in her eyes whenever she entered the house. Jamal was not handling it well either. He was a good, hard-working man who always aimed to provide a good life for his wife and child. But his work started to decline. A good friend persuaded him to invest in a venture that promised large returns. I remember one night when Amani and Zuri were asleep, Jamal sat with me in the yard, his face etched with worry. "Mom, I don't want my wife and daughter to suffer because of me," he said in a low, determined voice. "If this business succeeds, I'll get Amani and Zuri a bigger house, a life without any worries." I told him to be cautious and not to act hastily, that happiness isn't found in wealth. But Jamal was young and ambitious, and perhaps he felt the need to prove himself as the man of the house. I couldn't hold it against him, but I had a bad feeling. Just 1 year later, it all came crashing down. The business venture was a failure, and Jamal lost all his money. He was swamped with debt. I watched Jamal transform from a hopeful young man into a withdrawn one. He always wore a grim expression. I once found him sitting in the backyard with a vacant stare, his eyes bloodshot. Holding a cigarette he wasn't even smoking. Zuri, who was only 4 at the time, ran up to him and placed a small wildflower in his hand. Her innocent smile meant to comfort him. Jamal just embraced the girl tightly without a word, but I saw his shoulders shake. The debt collectors began showing up, pounding on the door. Their yelling was audible down the street. The neighbors started to whisper and point at Amani whenever she walked by. I saw my daughter becoming increasingly worn out, trying to support the family while Jamal fell deeper into his despair. One evening, Jamal asked Amani and me to join him in the living room. He stood with clenched fists and said with a shaky voice, "Amani, I don't want you and Zuri to suffer on my account. I think we should get a divorce." Amani was stunned. She burst into tears and hugged Jamal, pleading with him to stay. "Don't leave, Jamal. We can overcome this together." But Jamal simply shook his head, his eyes filled with anguish. "I don't deserve you, Amani. I won't drag you and Zuri down with me." Zuri, too young to comprehend, just stood in a corner, watching her mother cry and her father pull a suitcase toward the door. I was there, my heart shattered, but I was helpless. I understood Jamal's reasoning. I knew that for him, leaving was the only way to shield Amani and Zuri from the burden of his debts. But seeing my daughter collapse to the floor, holding Zuri and weeping, I wanted to scream that it was all a terrible mistake. Jamal left, taking a part of Amani's and Zuri's hearts with him, and creating a void that I knew could never be filled. After he departed, the debt collectors vanished. Amani severed all ties with Jamal and immersed herself in her career. She worked relentlessly day and night at her office, as if her job was the only thing that could help her forget the pain. Soon after, Amani received a pay raise and then a promotion. She decided to move with Zuri to a rented apartment far away from this house, which was filled with memories of Omari and me. I gave her my support, but I couldn't help but feel sad. I saw Zuri less frequently. I would only pick her up occasionally to spend the weekend with me. During those times, I could see that Zuri missed her father, and she would ask me, "Grandma, where's my dad? Is he going to come play with me?" I could only embrace her and lie, telling her that her father was busy but would visit her soon. In those years, Jamal lived quietly, working tirelessly to clear his debts. He rarely came to the house, afraid the collectors might appear and disturb Amani and Zuri. But I knew his love for Zuri never wavered. I once saw him standing on a corner some distance from Amani's home, just watching the girl play in the yard. He didn't get any closer. He just stood there, his eyes full of love and regret. I wanted to call out to him, to invite him in, but I held myself back, not wanting to make things more complicated. In the years after Jamal left, I observed Amani's struggle to manage. Like a tree attempting to grow amidst a storm, she found solace in her work, dedicating her days and nights to the architectural firm, as if only blueprints and contracts could erase the sorrow of losing her father and her husband. Amani advanced rapidly, moving from being just another staff member to a trusted part of the firm responsible for major projects. I was proud, yet it was painful to watch her. She was still young, just in her early 30s, but the light that once sparkled in her eyes was gone. I understood that Amani was not only building a career, but was also seeking a new home, a place for Zuri to grow up with love and where she could feel less alone. I continued to visit her home frequently to care for Zuri on the days she returned late. Zuri, my granddaughter, was older now but remained a sensitive child who loved to hug me and share stories from school. In those moments my heart felt joyful, but I couldn't shake my worry. Amani was so preoccupied she had little time to play with her daughter, and I feared Zuri felt lonely in her own house. I tried to compensate by making her favorite meals and telling her stories of her grandpa, Omari, but there was always a lump in my throat. A child needs her parents. At that time, Zuri only had me when Amani was unavailable. Then Marquise came into the picture. I can still recall the first time Amani mentioned him. Her voice was full of excitement, as though she had discovered a light after a long period of darkness. "Mom, I met him at the company party," Amani said, her eyes gleaming. "Marquise is a mature, very polite man, and he's easy to talk to. He's in the finance department and everyone adores him." I smiled, happy for her, yet I felt a bit of hesitation deep down. After all the pain with Jamal, I simply wanted Amani to find someone genuinely good, not just for herself, but for Zuri as well. Over time, Marquise became a regular presence at Amani's house. Each time he visited, he would bring a basket of fresh fruit or a small gift for Zuri, like ice cream, a doll, or a coloring book. I observed Marquise talking to Zuri in a gentle tone, always making jokes to get her to laugh. Once during a visit, I found him on the patio changing a light bulb, sweat on his forehead. He looked up and smiled at me. "Don't worry, Mom. You can leave the household repairs to me." His attitude put me at ease a little. I thought perhaps Amani had finally found a man who cared for her family, someone who could provide the happiness she truly deserved. Initially, Zuri was timid around Marquise. She would often stand behind me and give only a forced smile when he offered her a present. But in front of Amani and me, Zuri seemed to gradually warm up to him, or at least I believed so. One time I saw her eating an ice cream Marquise bought her, sitting in a corner with a smile. I told myself it was just a matter of time before Zuri got used to her stepfather. After all, the girl still missed her real dad, Jamal, very much. The few times Jamal called to check on Zuri, she would excitedly tell me about it in a voice as cheerful as a little bird's. I didn't want to push her to forget Jamal, but I also hoped Marquise would be a good father, even if he could never replace him. Amani and Marquise's wedding was a simple yet very warm affair. I remember that day well. Zuri wore a pastel pink dress and carried a small flower bouquet while standing beside her mother in the church. She looked lovely, but a hint of sadness lingered in her eyes, as if she were just trying to make her mom happy. Amani, however, was glowing. Her smile was as radiant as it was on the day she married Jamal. I sat in one of the pews with tears streaming down my face, not of sadness, but of hope. I prayed silently that this would mark a fresh start for my daughter, for Zuri, and for our whole family. Marquise, with his courteous demeanor and confident smile, led me to believe he would bring tranquility to the lives of Amani and her daughter. After the wedding, Marquise moved in with Amani. He presented himself as a diligent man. He would drive Zuri to school. He often came by my house to say hello and even repaired the squeaky wooden kitchen door at Amani's. I saw him as considerate and attentive, and I began to think my worries had been excessive. Once, Marquise brought me a jar of honey, saying he purchased it in his hometown and knew I enjoyed it. "Take care, Mrs. Dunai," he told me with a sincere tone. I thanked him, feeling relieved. Maybe, I considered, Marquise truly was a good man. But Amani was becoming increasingly busy. She took on larger projects, left early, and came home very late. There were times she would even be at the office on weekends. Marquise, meanwhile, started traveling frequently for work, which meant Zuri was left alone at home more often. I began to feel concerned. I was worried the girl felt isolated. One day, Amani called me. Her voice was weary. "Mom, I'm overwhelmed with work. I can't be with Zuri all the time. Can you come over and look after her during the day?" Hearing her voice, I felt a mix of pity and sadness. "Of course, dear, don't worry. And I will take care of Zuri," I responded without hesitating. I loved Amani, but I loved Zuri more. A 10-year-old girl, no matter how resilient, needs love and attention. From that day, a new routine began. I would go to Amani's house early in the morning. I'd prepare Zuri's breakfast and walk her to school. In the afternoon, I'd pick her up, make her lunch, and ask about her day. At night, I'd go back to my own home, my heart full from spending time with Zuri, but also heavy because I saw she was growing quieter each day. There were times I noticed Zuri's smiles were forced, and her gaze would wander whenever I brought up Marquise. "Are you having a good time with your stepfather?" I'd ask, trying to sound nonchalant. Zuri would simply nod and whisper, "Everything is fine, Grandma." I felt a tightness in my throat, but I didn't dare push it. I reasoned that perhaps she was still adjusting to Marquise, especially since she missed Jamal so much. Tonight, after the truth was revealed, I could hardly get any sleep. My eyes were stinging, but slumber would not come. The recording of Marquise's voice replayed endlessly in my mind. Every icy word and each of Zuri's sobs felt like a stab to my heart. I lay beside my granddaughter, watching her innocent face in a troubled sleep, and my soul felt like it was on a razor's edge. The following morning, I attempted to behave normally. I brought Zuri to school as I would on any other day. The girl walked quietly, without uttering a word, simply holding my hand tightly the entire way. I smiled at her, acting as if all was well, but inside, I knew I was getting ready for a fight. The recorder was in my old tote, like a ticking bomb poised to detonate. I dropped Zuri off at her classroom, watching her walk slowly, her heavy bag pulling one shoulder down. "Be good, my love," I said, forcing a sweet tone. Zuri only nodded, her eyes still clouded with pain. I turned and walked away, my heart in pieces, vowing to myself that today I would confront Imani, even if it meant shattering what was left of our family. Imani did not arrive home until late. I had chosen to stay, though I would have typically returned to my own house by then. I was sitting at the dining table, holding my tote bag, a fire burning inside me. But I tried to remain calm. When Imani entered, I could see her exhaustion and the dark circles beneath her eyes. She quickly slipped off her heels and threw her purse on the sofa. "Mom, you're still here?" she inquired. Her voice held surprise, but her weariness was obvious. I didn't reply immediately. I just stood up and motioned to a chair. "Sit down, Imani. We need to talk." Zuri was seated silently beside me, clutching her backpack with her head down. I removed the recorder from my bag. I set it on the table and with shaking fingers pressed play. The humming started, followed by Marquise's cold, frightening voice. "Zuri, I'm home." Zuri's sobbing voice answered on the recording. "Dad, I'm not scared." And then came Marquise's threatening tone. "If you tell your mom, she'll abandon you. This is our secret." Each word was like a knife, and not just to me. I watched Imani freeze, her eyes wide, as she gripped the table's edge. But then, as if refusing to believe it, Imani frowned and dismissed it with a gesture. "That's impossible. This is fake. Zuri, you despise your stepfather. You made this up, didn't you?" Her tone was sharp, as though she was trying to reject the truth before her. I stared at her in disbelief. "Imani," I nearly yelled, my voice shaking with fury. "Can't you hear that's Marquise's voice? She's 10 years old. How could she invent something like this?" I pointed at the recorder with a trembling hand, feeling my blood boil. Imani's face flushed red. She shot up and her voice rose to a scream. "Then you tell me how a young girl could record this. Zuri always wants to go live with Jamal. He must have put her up to it. Jamal is envious of Marquise. He's been trying to ruin this family since before my marriage to Marquise." I was stunned and asked, "What did Jamal say to you about Marquise?" Enraged, Imani explained that since Marquise started visiting the house, Jamal had called her, claiming a former coworker of Marquise's warned him that he was not a good man and had a questionable past. "Jamal is just jealous that I found happiness again," Imani shouted. "He wants to destroy my family, so he used Zuri to do it." I suppressed my anger and looked at Zuri. The girl was shaking, her eyes welled with tears as her small hands clutched my arm. "I told you, Grandma," Zuri sobbed, her voice choked. "I've told my mom so many times, but she never listened to me." Her cries tore at my heart. I held her close, feeling her small body tremble in my embrace. "Don't you be scared, my love. I am here," I whispered to her. But my gaze remained fixed on Imani, as if I could burn through her denial. Imani leaped up, her hands shaking, and pointed at Zuri. It was definitely Jamal. He has always tried to turn her against me. He wants her to resent Marquise. Her voice cracked as if she were trying to convince herself more than me. I had heard enough. I slammed my hand on the table and yelled, "Imani, you are so blind, you can't see your own daughter suffering." The sound echoed through the room, making it vibrate, The air grew so thick it felt difficult to breathe. The only sound was Zuri's quiet sobbing, a small, sharp noise, like a cry for help. I embraced her tightly, looking straight into Imani's eyes. I felt a tremendous fury, but also a profound pain. Imani, my daughter, whom I had raised and loved my entire life, was now choosing to believe a man over her own child. "Listen to me, Imani," I said in a low yet firm voice. "This isn't fake. It's the truth. It's Zuri's pain, and if you won't believe her, then I'll protect her myself." I squeezed Zuri's hand, feeling its faint warmth, a reminder that I could not leave her alone for even a moment. The atmosphere in Imani's kitchen felt oppressive, as if the air itself had thickened. After our argument, Imani stood with her arms folded, her face flushed and her breathing uneven, as though she was struggling to control her anger or perhaps her own confusion. I stayed seated beside Zuri, stroking her back gently and feeling her small body still shaking under my hand. Zuri's sobs were like a series of daggers to my heart, filling me with both pain and fury. I took a deep breath, looked at Zuri's swollen eyes, and asked her as softly as I could, "Tell me the truth, my love. How did you get that recorder?" I had to know, not from doubt, but to understand the full picture and be certain I had all the facts. Zuri paused, her small hands fiddling with her backpack strap while her head remained down. Suddenly, her crying intensified. Her sobs reverberated in the quiet kitchen, sounding as if they were shattering everything. "Grandma," she wept, her voice choked. "A few weeks ago, when I met my dad, I was crying. I only managed to tell him that my stepfather disciplined me a lot, that I was afraid of him. My dad didn't ask for more details. He just gave me this little device. He said if I ever felt I was in danger, I should press the red button." Zuri's confession struck me like a blow. I froze, still holding her, my mind reeling. Jamal, the father who had left, who had endured so much to keep them safe, was the one who provided his daughter with a means to protect herself. I felt a mixture of sorrow and gratitude. Jamal, though absent, was still finding a way to look after his child. But before I could speak, Imani cut in with a harsh voice, as if venting all her rage. "See? It was Jamal who taught her to invent all of this. He wants to ruin this family." Imani's eyes blazed with fury, and she pointed at Zuri as if she were the cause of everything. Zuri, terrified, clung to my shirt and shook her head frantically. "No, my dad didn't tell me to lie," she cried, her voice raw. "I just recorded it. I didn't want my stepfather to do that to me anymore. I was so scared, Grandma." That last word was a plea that made my own tears impossible to restrain. I hugged her closer, feeling her small body shudder in my arms. "Don't be afraid, Zuri," I whispered, my voice cracking. "Your grandma believes you. I will not let anyone harm you again." I turned to Imani, and the rage within me erupted like a wildfire. "Imani, can't you hear what the device recorded?" I nearly screamed, gesturing to the small recorder on the table. "The child is crying. What kid can act that well? Do you believe Zuri, a 10-year-old girl, would invent something so awful just to hurt Marquise?" My voice broke, not from weakness, but from the fury and pain that were tearing me apart. I was in disbelief that Imani, my own daughter, would take the side of a man over her own child. Imani gripped the table's edge. Her nails bit into the wood so deeply I heard the sound. She looked at Zuri. Her eyes faltered, but her expression remained stubborn. "No, this is all Jamal's fault. He must have coached her to say these things." Her voice shook, as though she was trying to persuade herself more than me. I shook my head, astonished by her denial. "Imani, you are fooling yourself," I said in a low, sharp tone. "Can't you see the pain in her face? Don't you hear her crying on the recording? That is not an act. It is the truth." Zuri couldn't bear it any longer. She jumped up and screamed in desperation, her voice shrill. "You never listened to me. I told you so many times, but you only believe my stepfather. You never believed me." Her words felt like a knife, not just for Imani, but for me as well. The girl was shaking violently, tears flooding her face, and then she suddenly collapsed into my arms as if her strength had vanished. I panicked. I held her and shook her gently. "Zuri, my love, wake up." My heart was racing. Fear constricted my throat as if to choke me. Amani stood frozen, her hands trembling, and she stumbled back as if she had been struck. She looked at Zuri, then at me, her eyes red but still unyielding. I didn't know," she stammered, her voice faint. But I had no more patience to listen. "You didn't know?" I yelled, my voice echoing in the kitchen. "You didn't know your daughter was suffering. You chose to believe Marquise. You chose your pride over listening to Zuri's cries." I hugged her tightly, feeling her shallow breathing, and my heart completely broke. I placed Zuri on the sofa. I grabbed a damp cloth to wipe her face and searched for an old bottle of rubbing alcohol in my bag to dab on her temples. The strong scent filled the air, and I hoped it would help revive her. A moment later, her eyelids fluttered and then opened, but her gaze remained frightened, as though the nightmare still held her. "Grandma," she whispered weakly, clutching my shirt. I held her and tried to sound calm. "I am here, my love. Don't be afraid." I turned to Amani, my daughter, who stood there pale with trembling hands. "If you will not protect Zuri, then I will," I said, my voice shaking with rage. "You no longer deserve to be her mother." My words were like a blade, sharp and unforgiving. I didn't want to hurt Amani, but seeing Zuri trembling in my arms, I could not forgive her blindness. Imani shrank back, her eyes full of tears, but still obstinate. "Mom, don't say that. It's just that I didn't want to lose face. I didn't want people to talk." Her voice cracked as if she was pleading for my understanding. I cut her off with a voice as hard as steel. "Lose face? Your pride is not more important than your daughter's life and honor." I pointed at Zuri with a shaking hand. "The girl pleaded with you. She told you so many times, but you chose to believe Marquise. You chose the illusion of happiness over your own flesh and blood," I nearly screamed, unable to hold back any longer. Amani stood there, her shoulders slumped, but I no longer had the patience to console her. I had already lost Omari. I had already lost my family's joy. I could not let Zuri suffer for one more second. Without pausing, I took out my phone and dialed Jamal's number. His worried voice came through on the other end. "Mom, what's going on? Why the sudden call?" I took a deep breath, trying to keep my own voice steady. "Get to Amani's house right now. It's something extremely serious. It's about Zuri." I said nothing more. I ended the call, a fire burning in my chest. Jamal, despite his distance, was still the girl's father. I was certain he would come without hesitation upon learning his daughter was in danger. Less than 2 hours later, Jamal was at the door. He looked thinner than I remembered. His hair was disheveled, but his expression was firm, as if he was prepared for anything. He carried a folder under his arm, but what stood out most was his look of controlled anguish, as if he already suspected something awful. The moment Amani saw Jamal, she became furious and shouted, "What are you doing here? This is no longer your concern." She positioned herself in front of him as if to defend her home. Jamal held his ground, looked her straight in the eye and said, stressing each word, "Zuri is my daughter, and I have every right to protect her. I made the mistake of leaving once, but I will not ignore her when she is in trouble." His words felt like a declaration of war, not on Amani, but on everything that had harmed Zuri. I could see his eyes were red, not from sadness, but from a father's rage and pain. Zuri burst into tears. She broke away from me and ran to embrace Jamal, burying her face in his chest while saying through sobs, "I want to go with you, Dad. I don't want to be in this house anymore. I hate my mom. I hate my stepfather." The child's crying filled the room, shattering the air. Jamal held her tightly, stroking her hair, and said in a broken voice, "I am here now. Zuri, I won't let you be afraid anymore." I stood there, tears streaming down my face, finding a small measure of comfort in seeing that Zuri had found a safe place. Yet, at the same time, it was agonizing to see my family fracturing once again. Jamal glanced up at me, confused. I said nothing. I just silently picked up the recorder and pressed play. Marquise's voice echoed, cold and terrifying. Every word was like a knife. Jamal's expression quickly shifted from confusion to horror, and finally to fury. After the recording finished, he leaped to his feet, his fists clenched, and turned to Amani, shouting so loudly it felt like he might break something. "I may have failed you, Amani, but I never abandoned Zuri. You, however, left her with a monster." Jamal's words were sharp, a direct slap to Amani's face. Zuri let go of Jamal and stood there, her eyes red, staring at her mother. Her voice was shaky but filled with resentment. "Mom, I endured it for a long time. It wasn't just once. It happened many times when you weren't home. When it was only him and me, I was terrified. I told you. I begged you to believe me. But you just scolded me and said I was lying because I hated my stepfather. Every time you did that, I felt like no one cared." Zuri's words were like a flood that swept everything away. I put my arms around her. Tears streamed down my face. I couldn't contain my sorrow. Jamal squeezed her hand. His eyes were also red, as if he was restraining himself from going to find Marquise. At that moment, Amani trembled. Tears fell without stopping. Her face was ashen. She looked at Zuri, then at me, and stammered, "No, this can't be happening. I'm a terrible mother." Her voice broke as the truth finally shattered her denial. I stood before her, looked her in the eyes, and said firmly, "You chose to believe a man over your own daughter, Kim. That is the greatest sin. If you do not stand by Zuri today, then as of now, you are no longer my daughter." My words were like an axe, merciless. But I had no regrets. I had lost too much already, and I could not let Zuri suffer any longer. Imani burst into tears, sinking to the floor and covering her face with her hands. "Mom, forgive me, I didn't know," she sobbed. But I just stood there, holding Zuri, my heart heavy. Jamal lifted Zuri and whispered something to her while I watched, aware that the truth could no longer be ignored. The room felt frozen. The only sounds were Imani's crying, Jamal's whispers, and the painful beating of my own heart. I stood up and said with a firm voice, "We need to get Zuri to the hospital immediately. She has to be examined." Jamal nodded and quickly lifted Zuri. His eyes were filled with resolve. Imani, looking pale, just followed us silently, like a remorseful shadow. The taxi ride to the hospital felt like an eternity. Zuri was nestled against Jamal, her eyes shut and her hands gripping his shirt. I sat beside her, trying to remain composed, but my heart was lodged in my throat. Imani sat in the front, quiet, her hands clasped tightly and her gaze fixed out the window. No one spoke, but the atmosphere was so tense. I felt as if I couldn't breathe. I just wanted to hold Zuri and tell her everything would be fine. But I knew that words of comfort were not enough to heal the trauma she had suffered. At the pediatric emergency room, a young doctor greeted us. He had a kind expression and spoke in a gentle yet professional tone. "How is the little girl, Xiang?" he asked, taking notes while looking at Zuri. The child hid behind Jamal, afraid to look around, as if she feared anyone might touch her. I sat down next to her. I rubbed her back and whispered, "Grandma is here, Zuri. Don't be afraid." But each time I saw her terrified eyes, my heart ached. I saw Jamal clenching his fists as if suppressing his rage. After a few minutes, the doctor called Jamal and me into the hall. Imani stayed seated, her face hidden, trembling. "The girl has signs of physical assault," the doctor stated in a serious voice. "Additionally, she is in a state of severe psychological distress. She will require long-term treatment both physically and mentally." His words were like a knife, confirming my deepest fear. I felt my knees buckle, but Jamal supported me. His eyes were red, but his gaze was steady. "Thank you, doctor," he said, his voice choked. "We will do whatever is necessary to help her." When we re-entered the room, Imani jumped up and began to cry. "Oh my God," she murmured, as if the reality had finally broken through her denial. I said nothing. I just looked at her, feeling a mix of anger and pity. The doctor asked for more details about what had happened, and without hesitating, I pulled out the recorder and handed it to him. "Listen to this," I said, my voice shaking. As Marquise's cold and terrifying voice filled the air, the doctor's brow furrowed, and he started writing more quickly. When the recording finished, he looked at us and said gravely, "This is extremely serious. I recommend you contact the authorities right away." We went to the police station near the hospital without a second thought. The atmosphere inside the precinct was solemn. It smelled of stale coffee and paperwork. A female officer led Zuri to a private room with a social worker to help calm her down and speak with her. Zuri held my hand tightly before she went in. Her eyes pleaded with me not to abandon her. "I'll be right outside, Zuri," I said, forcing a smile. "You don't need to be afraid anymore." But as the door shut, I felt my heart tighten. Jamal, Amani, and I each gave our statements. I recounted everything, from Zuri's arrival with red eyes to the horrifying recording. Jamal, his voice thick with fury, added the detail of how he had given Zuri the recorder for her protection. Amani sat silently, only nodding in response to questions as tears streamed down her face. When the recording was played in the evidence room, the officers exchanged grim looks. A commander, a tall and sturdy man, nodded. "We will take immediate action. This man is a danger. He cannot be on the streets another day." His words offered a glimmer of hope, but also sent a chill down my spine. Marquise, the man I had once trusted, was now a threat I could never have imagined. Upon hearing this, Amani sank into her chair, covering her face and whispering, "Oh my God, how could I have been so blind?" She wept, but I had no energy left to console her. I just wanted Zuri to be safe and to begin healing. The police made plans to arrest Marquise that very night when he returned from his trip. They also stationed a patrol car outside Amani's house in case he appeared late. We went back to my home. Zuri fell asleep on the sofa, her forehead still damp with a cold sweat. I covered her with a blanket and sat beside her, my eyes red. Seeing her there, so small and vulnerable, I couldn't stop my tears. "You should never have gone through this," I whispered while stroking her hair. Jamal sat in a corner, his gaze fixed on Zuri, as if he feared she might vanish if he looked away. Imani went to the kitchen silently to do the dishes, but I knew her mind wasn't on it. Her face was a mask of sorrow, and her hands shook as she handled the plates. Finally, she turned to me and said quietly, "Mom, please forgive me. I didn't believe Zuri." I looked at her, my heart heavy. I wanted to hug her and say I understood, but I couldn't. "You need to apologize to Zuri, not to me," I replied, my harsh tone not concealing my pain. Imani bowed her head, and her tears dropped to the floor. I knew she was remorseful, but I also knew the wound in Zuri's heart would not be easily mended. At about 11 p.m., my phone rang. A serious male voice on the line was brief but direct. "Mrs. Calloway, we've apprehended Marquise at the airport." I exhaled, but my heart was still racing, as if I had just woken from a terrible dream. I hung up the phone and looked at Zuri, who was sleeping soundly on the couch. Her face still showed a hint of a cold sweat. I tucked her in securely. I sat down beside her, feeling a combination of relief and sorrow. Justice was in motion, but the injuries to Zuri's soul would require much more than a legal verdict to heal. The next morning, the story about Marquise was all over the morning news. A photo showed him in handcuffs, his head lowered and his hair a mess, without a trace of the polite man I once knew. Social media erupted with angry posts and comments demanding justice for Zuri. The newspapers dubbed him the demon in a suit, and every word felt like a betrayal of the trust I had once had in him. I sat watching the television with my fists clenched, experiencing a mix of satisfaction and pain. I was satisfied because Marquise would not get away with it, but pained for all the suffering Zuri had endured. The day of the first trial arrived like a storm. I sat in the front row and my heart sank when I saw Marquise enter, wearing an orange prison uniform, looking disheveled with his head down, as if trying to avoid everyone's gaze. The man I once believed would be a source of comfort for Imani was now just a guilty shadow. Imani was sitting beside me, not daring to look up. her hands clasped together as tears fell silently. I didn't look at her, not from anger, but because I needed to stay strong. Today was for Zuri. Thankfully, Zuri was permitted to avoid facing him in person. Instead, the court was presented with the recording and the doctor's report. When Marquise's voice echoed through the cold courtroom, everyone was shocked. I could hear people murmuring and sighs of outrage. The doctor's report detailing Zuri's physical and psychological condition made me bite my lip to stop from crying. Amani could not contain herself and broke into sobs, but I just squeezed her hand without speaking. I knew Amani was facing the consequences of her blindness, but it was not the time for blame. When the harsh verdict was announced, the entire courtroom erupted in applause. Marquise was declared guilty, and I knew that justice had prevailed. But as he was led from the courthouse, the crowd outside pelted him with eggs, rotten produce, and even trash. They shouted at him with voices filled with hatred. "Pay for what you did, you monster!" I stood there observing the scene with a mixture of satisfaction and sorrow. I was satisfied that Marquise was receiving his due, but sad because none of this could undo the dark days Zuri had lived through. Following the trial, Imani became the focus of public censure. The press labeled her the blind mother, while neighbors would whisper and actively avoid her. I once overheard Mrs. Hollins, a neighbor I've known my whole life, murmur to another person, "How could a mother not trust her own child and allow her to endure that?" My instinct was to defend Imani and explain that she was also a victim of her own denial, but I refrained. Imani silently endured all the judgment as if it was her penance. "I deserve this, Mom," she said to me one time, her voice filled with remorse. I simply nodded in response, knowing that only her future actions and the passage of time could mend her error. Zuri came to live with me. My small house, which had felt so deserted since Omari's passing, was now filled with her voice once more. I worked to create a safe environment for her, a place where she could laugh freely. Shortly after, a psychologist reached out, offering to help Zuri at no cost, touched by her story. "The child needs to heal," she told me with a warm voice. I accepted right away, grateful that there were still kind people willing to help. Gradually, Zuri started to open up again. She returned to school, and I saw her smile come back, even if it was still delicate. Her teachers and friends were amazing. They supported her and gave her paper flowers they had made with simple notes like, "Zuri, you are so strong," or "Keep going. We are here for you." Each time Zuri brought home one of those flowers, I saw her eyes brighten, as if small sunbeams were finding their way into her heart. Jamal, having settled all his debts, began visiting Zuri often. He would take her to the park. We would make simple dinners together, filled with laughter. Zuri clung to her father as she once did, excitedly telling him about school, her new teacher, or the boy who sat next to her. Seeing them together brought peace to my soul, as if a fragment of our former happiness was returning. Jamal had also changed. He was no longer the quiet, remorseful man he had become. "Mom, I will never let Zuri suffer again," he told me once with a firm voice. I nodded, knowing he was trying to atone for past mistakes. Imani, now living by herself, went to work quietly and would visit Zuri on the weekends. She learned to be patient. She was no longer as stubborn as she once was. But Zuri remained distant, and a hint of reservation was still in her eyes when she saw her mother. One time, Imani brought her a cake, her favorite kind, and said timidly, "I baked this for you. Would you like some?" Zuri nodded but did not smile. She just took a slice and ate it slowly. I knew the wound in her heart would not be easy to mend, but I was relieved to see that she no longer completely shut her mother out. One afternoon, I sat on the patio watching Zuri chase some birds, and her clear laughter sounded like tiny bells in the evening light. I felt a deep sense of peace, but I also thought to myself that only when we listen to a child's voice can we truly rescue them from the darkness. I had come so close to losing Zuri, to letting her be consumed by a pain that no one was hearing. But now, seeing her laugh, I knew I had fulfilled the promise I made to her, to Omari, and to myself. Although the path ahead was long, I would always be there to protect Zuri. so she could find the light in her life once more. I have experienced it all, from agony to rage. Looking back now, I have one thing I need to tell everyone. Do not ever discount the voice of a child. Their fears, their tears, and their cries for help are not made up to annoy adults. I watched my own granddaughter fall apart from pain because of the denial and selfishness of those meant to keep her safe. In the end, however, justice was served. That monster posing as a stepfather paid a steep price in court, and my daughter must live with her regret forever. The lesson I wish to share from this experience is this. Real love is not about saving face or reputation. It is about safeguarding the dignity and security of those we love, particularly children. As for those with a wicked heart like Marquise, the only fate they merit is harsh societal punishment and the lasting scorn of all. The names and locations in the story you just heard were changed to protect the identities of those involved. We share this not to pass judgment, but in the hope that it makes someone listen and reflect. How many mothers endure suffering silently in their own houses? I often wonder, if you were in my position, what would you have done? Would you have stayed quiet for the sake of peace, or found the courage to confront everything and find your voice? I would like your thoughts, as each story can be a light that guides another. God is always good, and I believe bravery brings us to a better future. If you enjoyed this video, please remember to subscribe so I can continue creating more content like this.